Now on Open Book, Ben Smith, editor-in-chief of Semaphore, but he's also a former media columnist for the New York Times and founding editor-in-chief of BuzzFeed News. But he's now out with a best-selling book, Traffic, Genius, Rivalry, and Delusion in the billion-dollar race to go viral. So, Ben, you've had quite an illustrious career. You know, if you were on Wall Street, you would have been a partner of one of these big firms. Okay, you've done a lot of big jobs, Ben.
I know
in
I made
media.
some poor choices in my life, I guess.
Well, no, I'm not saying that. You're at the top of your game, but I'm impressed with the things that you've done and the way you think about the media. So let's just go right there. When you talk about going viral or traffic, when I'm an old guy, so that was like clicks and page views back in the day. But it's a little different now, right? It's a little bit of TikTok virality, Instagram virality, something catches favor, or a meme on Twitter and it goes in an explosive zone. Tell us about what traffic means to you. What did it mean and what does it mean today?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're in this moment of real kind of weird change in really digital media entirely. And I think it's not totally clear what comes next. You know, we're at sort of the end point of what were the huge drivers of traffic. Facebook, first of all, but Twitter was the driver of political kind of attention and conversation. And it's not like those things will turn off the lights tomorrow, but they were the centrally cultural relevant forces for a decade, and they're not anymore, and they're fading. I was at the New York Times as the media columnist, and I left BuzzFeed in 2020. Got to the Times and was just sort of like, what just happened? Like, what did we all just live through? And the book was my attempt to kind of go back to the origin story of this moment where we all became obsessed with traffic and where people, particularly in the worlds I'm most familiar with, which are media and politics, sort of shifted toward this kind of new kind of connection to people on the internet.
So some people would accuse the media of going for the eyeballs and potentially slanting and creating more bias than the media that you and I grew up with, sort of that Columbia School of Journalism objectivity standard. Where do you think things really are? Because I don't want the tribal angle. I want the reality angle.
So I mean, everybody has always liked to complain about the media, and I bet if I talked to you in 2004, you wouldn't have said, "Wow, the media is perfect. I love how they all went to the Columbia School of Journalism." And to me, honestly, this book is more kind of a history, and the way I think about it is more history than kind of diagnosis. I mean, I think if you go back to the beginnings of this moment of thinking of this new generation of digital media, what you had were people who were incredible, readers who hated what they were getting, right? Like you had a choice of a couple of newspapers, a couple of television networks that, conservatives felt like totally didn't represent them, that lots of people felt accurately had totally blown coverage of the Iraq War, the most important story of their generation, and who weren't on the internet, which is where we were all actually talking to each other by then. And so there was this, it wasn't like it came out of nowhere. There was this like popular interest in these new outsider voices that challenged this mainstream consensus. And they, I was part of that, like happily, had also had these new tools of measuring what people were interested in. And of course, journalists had always had the impulse to pander to their audience and to tell people what they want to hear. But suddenly you could really see it. Like you could know what people wanted to hear. And that was a big change. And in some cases, a very kind of, that led some people down a bad path.
I don't want to give away the book. The title of the book is Traffic, Genius, Rivalry, and the Delusion in the billion-dollar race to go viral. But there's some fascinating vignettes in the book, and I'd like you to tease people with it if you don't mind. Let's go right back to Gawker and Nick Denton and the party that you opened the book with. Some people don't even know what Gawker is, Ben. So tell us a little bit about what Gawker is, set the scene for us, and tell us the significance of that vignette.
Yeah, I mean, in that early moment in 2003, say, different people are looking at this. Suddenly, you can kind of like see who's coming to your website and why, and think about what can you give them to make them come back more, and measure it. And one of the people, the pioneers of the space, a guy named Nick Denton, a former British journalist at the Daily Telegraph and the Financial Times, who when he looked at American media, and sort of American culture, he just saw lots of hypocrisy of people who wrote these kind of polite, wooden sounding stories in the New York Times and then went to a bar and trashed the people that they were writing about. And I think his view was like, well, you should be writing what you actually think. Like journalism should be meaner and more, more honest and say what it says. And there were parts of this that honestly to me are still feel really right. Like to me, actually one emblematic one, he kind of accidentally started a feminist blog called Jezebel. And the first thing they did was offer a $10,000 bounty for an unretouched photo of a celebrity in a fashion magazine. And sure enough, like somebody stole a picture from Redbook of Faith Hill, where she still had freckles and smile lines, which had gotten erased in the publication. And they published it, and it was kind of a sensation. And like, that was something that was probably good to get rid of in media in some way, not just obviously in women's magazines, but broadly this kind of photoshopping of reality. But there was also kind of a cruelty to it, a sense of like, well, look, if people just want pornography, we'll just show them pornography, and that's fine. And like a sort of eagerness, almost like a belief in playing to people's worst instincts. And Gawker, which began as kind of a media gossip blog, written by bright young women in New York who were fun writers and very plugged into the moment, and it was this very outsidery voice, gradually became more powerful, more important, more insidery, but kept that cruelty sometimes. And I think kind of became known for like what started to feel like bullying. And its worst was publishing, sex tapes without people's consent.
You see, it's fascinating. And after reading the book, I want to test a theory on you, get your reaction to it. So the media really was the first big movement in decentralization. Once the internet exploded, you had the arrival of Drudge. You yourself were at Politico. You then went over to BuzzFeed, become one of the founders there. And all of a sudden, you didn't need the printing press. You didn't need the papers dropped off and that whole distribution mechanism. You had this sort of viral, decentralized distribution mechanism for your property, if you will, your intellectual property.
Yeah.
I guess some cruelty came with that, though, didn't there, or did there not? And if there did, what was that from? Is that a lack of editor-in-chief saying, whoa, that's too nasty or not objective enough? Or what do you think it was? First of all, am I right on that? And if I'm not right on that,
your basic read that there were, people talk about gatekeepers in media, but like they had gates. Like you owned a printing press, or you owned or you had access to a broadcast tower, and most people didn't. And if you didn't have those things, like that was a gate. It was a real gate. Like gatekeeper, it wasn't kind of a sort of metaphorical, there are gatekeepers in society thing. It was like, well, if you don't have access to a printing press or a broadcast tower, you can't send your message widely. And that really changed. And there were these new people. Nick Denton was one of them. Jonah Peretti, the founder of BuzzFeed, was another, who had kind of like really, who had ideas about what people would want in this new space. And for Denton, it was this kind of, rawness and unreserved exposure, which often was cruel. Peretti, who I worked for at BuzzFeed, had this ttotally different point of view that in some ways was accurate, in other ways totally diluted, which was that he was the first to really see the social internet coming, the Facebooks and the Twitters, in the sense that the main way that your content will be distributed is somebody will share it with a friend, somebody will share it on a social platform, and you've got to be thinking, what will people share? And his initial theory was people will share things that make them look good to their friends. They'll share appeals for earthquake relief. They'll share cute memes and cat pictures and funny jokes. They'll share like kind of thoughtful articles. They'll share new news. That's what he hired me to get. But they would certainly not go on these platforms and scream about politics, because like, who wants to be that person? Who wants to look to their friends like some maniac yelling about divisive politics all the time? I mean, that obviously turned out to be a massive mistake. And that was all people wanted to use these platforms for.
Yeah, no, listen, I mean, I find the whole thing fascinating. Obviously, I'm a media aficionado.
Well, you're now a media participant.
I spent a lot of time consuming the media. I spend some time getting attacked by the media. It's all good. I'm a big proponent of free speech, and so people can write whatever they want. And people are upset with me right now because I see no problem with CNN bringing on Donald Trump. I don't like Donald Trump. I certainly don't want him to be president. But let me tell you, he's the leading Republican figure, and he's a congenital liar. But he's going to be part of the mix in 2024. and we're a free speech society, so we have to sort of live with these things. I just want to ask you about mythology, if you don't mind.
Please.
If I say Ariana Huffington, we see sort of a left wing rival to Matthew Drudge and the Drudge Report. But if I say Andrew Breitbart, because of his death, I think it means different things to different people. You knew Andrew personally. I had a relationship with him as well. I don't see him the way he is lionized today, but I'm just curious what your reaction is. Has he been mythologized in any way? Who was Andrew
Yeah.
Breitbart for the young people that may not know him or know him personally?
He was, I mean, I think maybe it's in some ways more interesting to start with the myth, which is I think he's now seen as the father of contemporary conservative media. He had kind of an appetite for confrontation and a belief that politics starts in culture and in fights over kind of divisive cultural subjects, which may sound a little familiar to people. And people who can, he, there was, when he died, I think it was in 2012, I believe, the people around him included Steve Bannon, who took over Breitbart, pulled it into this very kind of divisive and political direct support, full-on support for Donald Trump. It included Ben Shapiro, who went into this a direction that maybe was more about fighting the culture wars and producing something that connected with young people and young conservatives, but lots of people came out of his orbit, all of whom kind of fight, I think in some ways try to claim his legacy and say what it was. I mean, he was this very complicated, difficult guy who had this strange experience of he was in Hollywood and kind of a misfit in Hollywood because he was a conservative, and got really addicted to this like early internet conversation on these message boards where this guy named Matt Drudge was sending around an email of updates of like anti-Clinton theories and stuff. And he was obsessed with Drudge, who was in many ways like a real breakthrough in the sort of tension between this wide open digital media and this sort of closed off traditional media. And he broke out when he heard that Newsweek was working on this story about Monica Lewinsky. And as Newsweek is deliberating about publishing it, Drudge just publishes it. And pretty soon after that, Andrew goes to work for him kind of as this anonymous minion. Like he's getting paid kind of irregularly, like whenever Drudge feels like sending him a check. He's he has all this power of having access for like 6 hours a day to the most important political platform in the country, but nobody knows who he is except for like occasional journalists like me who cotton onto it and started sending him links to our stories. And there was this moment I guess when was the Janet Jackson Super Bowl
The
wardrobe
2007
malfunction?
Super Bowl, yep.
Wardrobe
malfunction. Yep.
Somebody told me they were at a party with him, and he and he's there like programming the national conversation on this crazy thing that just happened. The language he's using on the Drudge Report is immediately on television, but no one at this party knows who the hell he is. And he tried to get out from Drudge's shadow in various ways. He co-founded Huffington Post with Ariana, which was meant to be a left-wing Drudge Report. He then founded Breitbart.com, which at first was trying to sort of siphon traffic and money off of the Drudge Report. It was a sort of a side hustle that Drudge granted him. And then eventually launched a set of blogs which were modeled on Gawker, on Nick Denton's Gawker, both in their structure and in that their big scoop was, a picture of Anthony Weiner's genitals, which was a very Gawker-y thing to do.
Yeah. Well, I remember that well, and I got the date wrong. I said 2007. It's a sign of old age, Ben. It was the 2004 January Super Bowl. Right. She was with Justin Timberlake, and obviously she had her famous wardrobe malfunction. So as crazy as that sounds, almost 20 years ago now, which seems like it was yesterday. But I had met Andrew at a David Koch conference. Now, the Kochs have also been mythologized, but back then, and just so everybody's clear, who paid tribute to Andrew Breitbart at his funeral, it would have included the likes of Mitt Romney, who is now a supposed rhino, but back then was sort of in the bell curve of conservatism. Of course, the Kochs now have been demonized, but I would have thought of them in 2009, 10, and 11 as more in the bell curve of conservatism. Yeah. And so here's the optimal question for you. Has the media contributed to spinning things out, or were things spinning out of control anyway? or was the segmentation and the decentralization that you describe in your book creating the political environment, or vice versa, or how are they harmonious with each other?
Yes. Is that the right answer to that question? I
Maybe,
mean,
maybe yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
I
So they
think
think the media
basically,
had something to do with it, right?
of course. And I think, I mean, you of all people, I think, kind of understand the extent to which these lines that people imagine between, there's this thing called politics, there's this thing called technology, there's something called business, there's something else called the media. Like those are fake lines. That's not how power works. That's not, and in fact, these things flow into each other very naturally, and they're effect, and the same trends run through all of them. And like in, and I think that's really what, when you sort of step back and look at the story of the sort of period that I wrote about, it's, you know, these deep changes in, particularly in digital media, but also in society, this collapse in trust in institutions that isn't just media institutions, rise in kind of individual voices, whether it's, you know, whether and you know, and the institutions that are being replaced by individuals include the media, they include the Republican Party, where Donald Trump is more important than the party, and all these trends sort of run together, and I think are really amplified in that kind of 2015 to 2017 period, in particular, by decisions made technically at the social platforms, Facebook in particular, that they're seeing this rise in what they see as engagement. And from their perspective, you know, they want you're spending 4 minutes on their site. They think that they can get you to spend 4 minutes and 30 seconds a day if they make some tweaks. Like, they're not thinking we want to elect some kind of politician or other. But what they do is provide this very rich platform for essentially, you know, for something that is very well suited to right-wing populism, to this kind of confrontational, provocative stuff where, like, if whether I like it or I hate it, I'm like, I want to write a comment and say fuck you, or say this is great, and the system then sees, wow, this guy is really engaged, let's show him more like that. And I think, you know, I think there were a lot of forces in society that, and real things people were angry about, driving it too. And cable news is, you know, part of this system too. It's not like there's some one factor, but certainly this all played out on social media. And actually, one of the big ironies, like, because, you know, I spent a lot of time in the book covering these new digital sites, notably the Huffington Post, that had sprung up to help Democrats, and that were that were progressive, and that saw the internet as, like, obviously is for young people and Democrats and progressives. And the election of Barack Obama is very naturally the culmination of the new media. I think that's how people saw it in the aughts. And in 2011, Obama went to visit Facebook. And he kind of went without saying, like, oh, Facebook's a democratic institution. It's where college kids are. It's like visiting a campus. You know, it like, and I think that was just this huge misunderstanding of what digital media was going to do. And in fact, the sort of politician who used it best, the movement that used it best, was Trump.
Well, let me say this, and I want to get test you. I mean, I think because you have such insight into this, and you're so real and honest about it. Are we at a point in time? I don't know, maybe 30, 40, could even be 50 years ago. David Halberstam wrote the book, The Powers That Be. There's just this great book about centralized media. I think he had Henry Luce in the book and Bill Paley, and there was centralized media, and there was, frankly, some coordination with the American politicians. As an example, you know, Franklin Roosevelt, they never showed him in the wheelchair. Sort of, that was okay. Jack Kennedy had his share of adulterous affairs. They sort of left that in a quote unquote lockbox somewhere. That era obviously is gone, never to come back. But I guess what I'm wondering is the era of our national unity also gone, because when you had the centralized media, and that was a centralized light beam into everybody's home, there was more of a unifying message. We sometimes say to each other, wow, we can't even debate anymore because I'm getting my facts from Fox News. You may be getting your facts from MSNBC or vice versa. And so now we don't even have the same facts when we come to the debate stage. Am I right about this? Am I wrong about this? Is there a cure for this, or what is the outcome, and how do you think it affects our national unity and our current tribalism?
That's a good question. I mean, I do think that that era that's gone, that people remember more fondly than honestly they experienced it. lots of people, including like conservatives and people who cared about civil rights and lots of others, felt like totally shut out by that sort of shared facts zone, and those shared facts weren't always facts. But I do think that era is over. But I think the era we all just lived through is over too, where you have this unbelievably divisive landscape all playing out on Facebook and on Twitter and on one platform, and we're headed into something more splintered, but maybe a little less divisive and shouty too. I think podcasts like this are part of it. People are finding voices they connect with and trust, and looking for help synthesizing all the chaos out there, rather than wanting just to
Listen,
like immerse themselves and swim in the chaos. I mean, that's, I started this new thing Semaphore, and that's how we're thinking about it a lot.
I was just going to say that I think Semaphore represents that, because let's go there for a second. What does Semaphore represent? I find the writing in Semaphore, you guys seem to be first to the news. I give you a lot of credit on scooping, but I think you're also laying it out there fairly objectively. Am I getting it wrong, or are you coming at it from a slant that I'm not totally getting? And I think I'm pretty good at reading the slant.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying. I mean, I hope. Yes, I mean, it's Semaphore. I mean, I think our goal. I mean, I don't think anybody buys that like we can create a new class of news robots who just tell you the facts as they are with no perspective. And so I think what we're trying to do is say, we're reporters who know what we're talking about, but and we can get, we can break news, we can tell you things you didn't know, and we'll also tell you what we think about that, what we think it means, that like we think Scaramucci totally screwed this thing up. But also we want to recognize, like, we could be wrong about that. We're not going to be wrong about the facts. But
well, I mean, enough people have written that about me. I don't think you guys need to.
And if somebody else thinks you did a fabulous job, we're going to go out of our way to find somebody who disagrees with us and include their voice too. And if there's perspectives from other countries, from other angles, we're going to try to sort of pull all that stuff together. Because I think part of the experience of reading the news now is thinking, like, what isn't this publication telling me? Like, this all seems too simple. Like, what's the alternate point of view? And then you read something in the New York Times and you go out and Google the same story to like read it a few other places and try to triangulate what's going on. And I think our sort of perspective is we want to help you do that rather than try to feed you a kind of simpler story or simpler perspective.
I think it's very, very fair. I want to go to the subtitle of this book. It's Genius, Rivalry, and the Delusion in the billion-dollar race to go viral. So I want to go to delusion first, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And then we'll go to rivalry and genius, but let's focus on delusion. Who are the most deluded?
I mean, I think that the people, Jonah Peretti, Nick Denton, me, like everybody who thought that we could kind of ride this tiger, and both that we could exercise some level of control over it, but also that the people running these big platforms, Mark Zuckerberg in particular, would ultimately want to align them with professional journalism and professional entertainment, that it was going to be in their interest to, like the way the cable operators, created an environment where CNN and ESPN and MTV could thrive, that these new social platforms would ultimately need to create an environment where journalism could thrive, among other things. Just wasn't true. Like, that was a mistake. I don't know if it was it was a delusion or just wrong, but that was a huge error. And that's why I think you look around, you see Vice, you see BuzzFeed, you see all these places really struggling.
I think what makes something a delusion is that you have some certainty, or you at least have some belief that it's going to go a certain way when the facts represent otherwise. I mean, there was delusion on the Trump campaign in 2016 about the ability to control the president, who was going to control him. I had dinner. I went with General Kelly to the Marine Corps Scholarship Foundation dinner 2 weekends ago. And we were obviously reminiscing about my firing, but we were also reminiscing about the Trump administration and how difficult it was, but how we were all delusional. Okay, so delusion is an interesting word. We can get things wrong. And sometimes we get it wrong, not because the facts are wrong, but because of our prism in terms of looking at the facts. We have a tendency to want to alter it to fit a truth that we may believe. I guess where I'm going from in that, Ben, what is the thing that you all were guided to? What you thought you were going to be the next Time magazine virtually? you thought? Like, what was the vision at
No,
the
I mean,
time?
it really was the idea that just as like, the advent of printing had as it created this whole profusion of newspapers like that hadn't existed before of the certain kind of like mass ability to print and the um, and particularly though cable, just to dwell on that and go back to it because it's hard to understand how people were thinking, particularly like what were investors who put hundreds of millions of dollars into new media thinking, like how do you explain that? And the actual answer is cable. People laid wires in the ground and they
Mhm.
thought and they need and they needed all this content to fill those new pipes and they hired MTV and ESPN to do that and they built huge businesses and made enormous amounts of money. And I think people who were investing in that space, that was fundamentally what they thought was going to happen, that these were new permanent pipes for the transmission of information, Facebook and Twitter and Snap and Pinterest and whatever. And
Listen, I think it's fascinating. I think it makes your book your book is great, even for people that are not interested in journalism, just interested in business and the current zeitgeist. The book is phenomenal. We're running out of time here. I want to go to my 5 words. So every one of my authors gets 5 words, Ben, and then you need to react to those 5 words, sort of like the Malcolm Gladwell blink sort of a
all
thing.
right,
I say the word and then you say blank. Ready?
all right,
Let's start. BuzzFeed.
viral. Are we're free associating here, or should I like talk for a
Yeah,
while?
no, free associate. Yeah, viral, right? Viral is what you think.
Sure.
I say BuzzFeed, you say viral.
Okay.
How about Vice? I say Vice, you say what?
Brand. Very pure
That's
brand.
okay. Okay. Facebook.
Um, Out of fashion.
Okay, so Facebook has jumped the shark. What about Semaphore?
You know, please sign up.
All right, that could be your best one. Okay, I gotta go to one subject, which is a thorny one for me, and less
Yeah.
so probably for you. But let's go to Sam Bankman-Fried. I say Sam Bankman-Fried. You say what? I'll tell you what I say. I say betrayal. I mean, that's my one word. But what do you say?
Yeah, I mean, I feel that way too. I mean, I didn't have the kind of, we didn't, he invested in our company and I didn't have the kind of complicated relationship or exposure that you guys did, but also, yeah, I mean, he really presented himself as something he wasn't.
Yeah, yeah, which
And
is
and obviously
unfortunately
created huge headaches for all his business partners.
gonna happen. Okay, in our last 30 seconds, I don't know anything about the media. I'm in the bookstore on Amazon. I see the title Traffic, Genius, Rivalry, and Delusion in the $1 billion race to go viral. I'm buying the book because why, Ben Smith?
Because it tells you how we got here.
Yeah, I think that's it. I mean, it's an excellent
idea.
examination of the social zeitgeist, and it'll get you right up to speed on where we are and potentially where we're going. You wrote a phenomenal book. I wish you great success with it. And thank you for joining us today on Open Book.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This is really fun. It's good.
He began setting about trying to assign me the things that he thought would most make me uncomfortable. That way he was going to get rid of me. And he assigned me to boxing.
You know, I hear broadcasting, I think personalities. I think of people like you. I lived it with you.
I was a semi-preppy, spit and polished kid from University of North Carolina. What in the world was I going to know about boxing? I certainly wasn't urban. Lo and behold, I received an offer to call boxing matches on the most prestigious boxing television network. I now had an affiliation with Tyson on the air. I had been covering his fight. The purest sport, the most honest sport, the sport that tells us the most about who we are, what we can endure, what we can't endure, what we are like when confronted with danger and potential damage at the hands of another human being.
Joining us now on Open Book is Jim Lampley. He's a Hall of Fame sportscaster, and he's now an author. The title of the book is It Happened, A Uniquely Lucky Life in Sports Television. But I have to say this from a distance, or I'm a huge fan, I'm a fanboy of yours, because I love your broadcasting, I love your insights, and I learned so much in this book, not only about sports and things that I witnessed as a kid or witness even today, but I learned a lot about you. So you've been the voice behind some of the most unforgettable moments in sports. And you can hear that voice in the book. So before we get into it, tell us about Jim Lampley. Why did you go into this career of yours?
Why
The
write a
brilliant
book,
career
or
that it is.
why go into sports television? Sports television was sort of my birthright from the beginning. My father died when I was 5 years old. My wife loves to say all of your stories begin with the same set of words. Those words are, my father died when I was 5 years old. I was 6 when my mother sat me down very explicitly and concertedly to watch a sports event on television. It just happened that the sports event she chose for initiating me was Sugar Ray Robinson versus Bobo Olson on Gillette Friday Night Fights for the middleweight championship of the world. And so she kind of guided me and schooled me into becoming a boxing fan. And she pointed out that day, by the way, watch Sugar Ray Robinson carefully. He's my favorite fighter because he dances while he fights. And he did. And that was expressive to me. But I spent the bulk of my childhood either in my great grandmother's kitchen, or my grandmother's kitchen, I should say, my grandmother's kitchen in Hendersonville, North Carolina, or in my mother's kitchen in Pompano Beach, and then later Miami, Florida, where she had gone to sell life insurance after my father died. And both my grandmother and my mother were nonstop inveterate storytellers, and they endowed me with all of their storytelling. And that was the guiding sort of narrative theme of my childhood. And they competed for my attention by telling me stories. So I can still hear them in my head. I know that I made that point in the book, that they are talking to me all the time, even to this day. And both have been gone for quite some time, but they're not gone from me. They still speak to me every day.
I mean, it's such a beautiful part of the book, but you also talk about belonging. And you also talk about, because some of you, look, when I started my career, I was a blue collar kid. I got to Wall Street. I was very green. I was somewhat insecure. It took a while for me to gain my confidence. I mean, you did everything: college football, Olympics, Wimbledon, the Ryder Cup, boxing. When did the light bulb go off to, like, I belong here? When did you think that?
Well, I began my network television sports career by winning a talent hunt. And my winning the talent hunt was completely counterintuitive and flew in the face of everything that ABC Sports had said they were looking for. The overall narrative is that in attempting to cover the captivity of 11 Israeli athletes at Munich in 1972, and attempting to satisfy the storytelling demands of two reporters, Howard Cosell and Peter Jennings, ABC had learned a great deal that they didn't know before about the capabilities of wireless cameras and microphones. And after Munich was over, they came back to New York, and there was a meeting among the sports division, the news division, and the engineering division. And the question was, now that we know that these signals will jump over concrete walls, or that they'll go around metal barriers, what can we do with all that? And the thing that was first decided upon was we could put a reporter on the sideline of a football game. So that became the sideline of college football. That became a 432 candidate talent hunt for the first person to be named as a, quote, college age reporter. That began the process by which virtually every live sports event you now watch, especially in conventional sports like football and basketball and baseball, has an on the field or sideline reporter. All that began with me and a Stanford graduate named Don Tollefson in 1974. And I wound up staying on the sideline of college football for 3 years, bitching and moaning the whole time because I didn't want to be there. I wanted to be moving on in my career. I wanted to be doing Wide World of Sports segments and going to the Olympics and doing the other things that I thought would be my right at ABC Sports. And eventually that's what happened. Eventually I did do all of those things, and I got the opportunities that I craved. And one thing led to another. And ultimately, I spent more than 40 years traveling the planet, going to sports events, covering them for various networks, 14 Olympics, ABC, NBC, CBS, Turner, boxing eventually on HBO, although the first person to assign me to boxing was a new incoming division president at ABC Sports, the successor to Roone Arledge, who wanted to get rid of me and thought that I would be such a stylistic misfit in boxing that he could easily get rid of me by making me embarrassed by putting me on the sport. And also that the audience would see me as Cosell's successor on boxing, and that would also ruin me. But the bottom line is I survived the experience, and ultimately he wrote me a ticket to HBO, the most prestigious television network in the world, and I wound up calling fights on HBO for 31 years. So some of my friends have pushed back against the inclusion of the word lucky in the title, but I say, when you're the one person eventually chosen from a 432 person talent hunt and you don't fit any of the credentials that they said they were looking for, you have to regard yourself as lucky. And I was.
There's a guy by the name of Roone Arledge, and I know you remember Roone Arledge. Okay. He loved you, Jim. He loved you. And you worked along some of these giants, Jim McKay, Howard Cosell. My first memory of Jim McKay was the 72 Munich Olympics, where we had the Israeli-Palestinian issue. Do you remember this?
Oh, well, of course. And, again, that what they learned from engineering during that period of time led to my genesis on the network. But yes, I watched the captivity coverage and everything up until McKay's most poignant moment in a career filled with unforgettable, poignant lines and moments, but they're all gone. They're all dead. Was the single most dramatic thing that Jim ever said on the air, and he delivered it with such matter-of-fact simplicity that it became iconic. And I deeply, deeply admired him. I admired him both from watching him on television and then from watching him at close range when we worked with each other. I don't think he deeply admired me. I don't think he liked the idea of my genesis at ABC Sports, but I couldn't blame him for that. I was ultimately going to be poaching on his territory.
Well, that's what that's what it's very Shakespearean. This. The younger man coming in, the older guy doesn't want to move. This is why we have the older guys in Shakespeare eating the lunch of the younger people. But
I know this because I was an English literature major in college, not a communications major, though I did ultimately go to graduate school in radio, television, and motion pictures. But yes, I have an English literature background, and the most influential professor I had in college was my Shakespeare professor, a guy named Peter McNamara.
Well, I mean, we both know human nature, which is so evident in your book. Talk about Cosell. So Howard Cosell, to me, reading about him, I feel bad about saying this. I haven't really breathed the words Howard Cosell until Jim Lampley brings him back into my life, and it happened because Cosell was my upbringing. Cosell was Monday Night Football. Cosell was Saturday Fights. Cosell was rocking and rolling with Muhammad Ali, who, if you ever come to my office, Jim, there's a huge painting of Muhammad Ali in my office that I made the champ sign because I used to go to his charity outing out in Arizona. I used to help raise money for Parkinson's research, and I loved the champ. But talking to us about Cosell, this is a Jewish lawyer from New York, awkward guy, incredible accent that is not your accent, by the way, or not a Jim McKay accent. Yet he becomes one of the more famous sportscasters. Tell us a little bit about him.
So Roone Arledge, before he moved to ABC and became president of ABC Sports, and eventually president of ABC Sports and ABC News, before all of that, Roone Arledge's executive position in television was that he was head of children's programming at NBC. And when he was head of children's programming at NBC, Roone would take a limousine into Manhattan from Westchester County on Saturday mornings to go and stand in the studio and supervise the feeds of children's shows. And when he was taking that ride in the limousine on Saturday mornings, he became acquainted with a Little League Baseball radio show that was being conducted on I think a Scarsdale radio station by an attorney named Howard Cosell. And Cosell literally had a Little League Baseball show. In fact, there was a later on executive at HBO, Steve Sheffer, a big time exec at HBO, who was one of the ball players that Cosell covered. And Sheffer would do a great imitation. Little Stevie Sheffer playing for Yeshiva, et cetera, et cetera. But that was where Arledge heard the voice. And when he heard the voice and the unique delivery and the unique cadence of all that, somewhere he stashed in his mind, I can do something with that. Maybe I can do something. That's really interesting that this guy is making it that way. And so when he became president of ABC Sports, he reached out and made Cosell a figure in his sports division so that he could have that voice, that very distinctive delivery and cadence and accent and voice that Cosell had.
I hear the voice. I see my mother's shag rug, Lampley. I see the bell bottoms. I see the walnut paneling of my youth. Carol Brady has called Jim Lampley and asked for the walnut paneling back when I hear Cosell's voice.
I was eventually chosen at ABC to be the Cub reporter on his magazine show. And it was a Saturday afternoon magazine show called Sports Beat. The fundamental content of Sports Beat was that every week Howard would do an in-studio interview with Bowie Kuhn, Al Davis, a couple of other guys who were his close compadres in sports. And somebody had to go out and do a feature piece. Somebody had to travel for the show to have legs, as it were. And I was the person who did that. So we had offices very close to each other on the 12th floor. And I would go to the office 2 or 3 days a week and sit and wait and listen for the moment when Cosell would step out of his office to where the secretary sat and say, hired, promoted, paid a 6-figure salary. It's insane. No talent whatsoever. This is a travesty. What is Roone thinking about? That was one version of Cosell's take on Jim Lampley. Then there was another version, which was, the kid down the hall is the only one here who's capable of completing a coherent sentence. None of those other morons, not little Jimmy, our host only shorter, or Frank Gifford, the golden boy, none of those people can actually speak English, but Lampley can. So it depended on what day it was and what I was doing and what he was doing, which of those two versions would be delivered. But I heard them both on a pretty regular basis from down the hall.
It's the best. I mean, I could listen to this all day long because this is, literally, I'm going to set the scene for you. I'm reading sporting news. I'm waiting patiently for Sports Illustrated. I'm getting a bowl of cereal in the morning, Jim, and I'm opening up the back of the Daily News so I can look at Bill Gallo's cartoons. And I'm shoveling in the Apple Jacks, and I'm watching you guys and loving you guys and living vicariously through these great athletes. Let's go to HBO boxing, by the way, which is another thing that my brother and I pestered my father, who was a crane operator. We had to get HBO in the house. And
oh my gosh, HBO on a crane operator's salary. Yeah, that's too bad.
Yeah, but I mean, we were addicted to HBO boxing. So tell us a little bit about HBO boxing and interacting with guys like Ali and Tyson and Foreman and Mayweather.
Well, I was assigned to boxing at ABC Sports by Arledge's successor in the sports division when Arledge became president of news, and eventually a new ownership, Capital Cities Broadcasting, decided it's crazy for somebody to be president of both sports and news. Rune, which one do you choose? Of course, he chose news. They took another guy from the stations division, Dennis Swanson, first person who had, by the way, given Oprah Winfrey a talk show at WLS in Chicago. That was his identity and cachet at the network. But they put him in charge of the sports division, and he arrived at the sports division with one basic predilection, which is, who is Jim Lampley and how do I get rid of him? So he began setting about trying to assign me the things that he thought would most make me uncomfortable. And that way he was going to get rid of me. And he assigned me to boxing right away. A, I would be seen as Cosell's successor. B, I was a kind of, semi-preppy, spit and polished kid from University of North Carolina. What in the world was I going to know about boxing? I certainly wasn't urban like Howard. And nobody understood or realized that my mother had assigned me to watch boxing, and that the first event she had ever sat me down to watch was a boxing match. So I began to be schooled by a network executive named Alex Wallow, a Greenwich, Connecticut product, who was, like you, in love with boxing. And he began to groom me to be a blow-by-blow announcer. And I think he did a pretty good job of grooming me to be a blow-by-blow announcer, because after a few months of that, and Dennis Swanson was at wit's end because he was not succeeding in getting me to leave the network. And in fact, I was getting some good reviews as the boxing blow-by-blow guy. Then I finally did walk away from my ABC contract. I went to work for CBS owned and operated stations, KCBS TV in Los Angeles. And I had a window within the contract under which I could do boxing for somebody. And lo and behold, HBO came along. So I received an offer to call boxing matches on the most prestigious boxing television network, HBO, as an unexpected consolation prize for basically getting canned at ABC. And my first several fights at ABC were Tyson's first several television network appearances. That was why HBO wanted me. I now had an affiliation with Tyson on the air. I had been covering his fights. They could see that the relationship was positive and good. And so I moved to HBO at that point to call boxing matches in 1988. And of course, early 1990 is when Mike was knocked out by Buster Douglas in Tokyo. And that was the first time when I was really stuck for an answer on the air. What am I going to say about this? The second time was when George Foreman knocked out Michael Moorer to become a 45-year-old heavyweight champion. And that is the moment when I said, it happened. It happened. And that was because Foreman had told me exactly how it was going to happen. And what he did in the ring mimicked everything he had said.
There's so many great, amazing stories in here. 14 Olympics had to be surreal. What's the Olympic memory that still gives you chills?
Well, two, and they're both in the book. The very first Olympic event that I ever attended live was Franz Klammer's downhill in Innsbruck, Austria in 1976, which I think is probably still the greatest and most charismatic alpine ski race run.
I watched that on a 13-inch Sony Trinitron in my bedroom, and I was supposed to be in bed. I was 12 years old, and my brother and I shared a bedroom. We had a 13-inch Sony Trinitron that I bought with the money from my paper route, and I watched Franz Klammer do that and the call on that.
Well, let's tell your followers that they have to now buy my book to understand the graphic details of how that run looked the way it looked, and the decision that Klammer made going into the starting shack as to how he could conceivably win the race. And one of the things I learned that day, which, I still chuckle about to this day, is that you think you're going to watch a ski race on the mountain. You don't. You feel it. You hear it. You respond to all of the atmospherics, but you certainly don't see it, other than maybe a moment when somebody goes racing by. And that's something I learned that day watching Plummer win that downhill. But that was one. And then the other, of course, is the Miracle on Ice. I was not supposed to be at the Miracle on Ice. I had other responsibilities. I was in a tape room editing a story about all of the political and organizational upheavals that had gone on in Lake Placid. And the phone rang, what was called the red phone. The red phone was the Arledge phone. I'd been at ABC 6 years at that point. I had never seen a red phone ring. And the red phone rang, and it was Arledge, and he said, "What are you doing?" And I told him, and he said, "Drop that, leave that with the editor, get over to the arena. I think something unusual is going to go on in this hockey game between the United States and the Soviet Union." Now, millions of Americans think that they watched the hockey game live. They did not. They saw it on tape. Because it was scheduled for 5 o'clock Eastern time. And it had been scheduled for 5 o'clock Eastern time all along when it was essentially a nameless game. Nobody knew which two teams would be appearing. It was a stepping stone toward the medal round. But eventually it came down to the United States versus the Soviet Union for what amounted to a semifinal, because the winner of this game was going to go into the final on Sunday morning. This was Friday evening. And when Arledge and the United States Olympic Committee went to the Hockey Federation to ask that the game be moved from 5 o'clock to 8 o'clock so that the American audience could see it in prime time, the Russians exercised their right to say, no way. Game has been on the schedule for 5 o'clock ever since the beginning of the games. Game is going to be played at 5 o'clock. So I'm in a tape room editing a piece. My associate director and I are working, etc. We've got a little monitor on top of the tape bay where we're watching the hockey game as it takes place. And at the end of the first period, Mark Johnson, who was the hottest goal scorer in the world for 2 weeks, got loose in the Russian goal, or in the Russian end, I should say, and slipped the puck under Vladislav Tretiak's glove to make the score 2-2, tie the game. Unexpected tie at the end of the first period. And at that moment, Viktor Tikhonov, the Russian coach, pulled Tretiak, yanking from goal the greatest goalie in the history of the sport, arguably, who had carried them to every world championship and gold medal for the preceding 10 or 12 years. He yanked Tretiak and put in the backup goalie, Anatoly Mishkin. And the game went on. And the red phone rang, and I picked up the red phone because both the tape editor and the associate director pointed to me like, that's got to be for you. And it was Arledge. And he said, "What are you doing?" And I told him. He said, "Let that wait, put that to rest, go to the hockey arena and get in, because I have a hunch something strange is going to happen in this game tonight, and we need an interview to take us off the air." And the last thing I said to him was, "Rune, I don't have the right credential to get into the hockey game." Now, this is only 8 years after Munich. We were still in a situation where if you didn't have the right credential to get into an Olympics event, you weren't going to get in. And the last thing Rune said to me was, "You'll get in." Clunk, hung up the phone. And I went over to the hockey arena and I found the high school hockey coach whose job it was to supervise the arena. And I had met him a few days before because my agent was a hockey agent, and he let me in. And I wound up watching the last 2 periods of the game there, and then eventually doing an interview that night to take us off the air with Jim Craig and Mike Ruzioni outside of a restaurant in Lake Placid after the biggest upset in the history of team sports. Never been a bigger upset.
I love rereading it in the book. And Mike Ruzioni, to us Italian Americans out here on Long Island, he was the man. We were wearing his jersey, and I remember having such anxiety watching that. And of course, Al Michaels' famous cadence, "Do you believe in miracles?" So I could do a 2-hour podcast with you because it's just amazing. But unfortunately we have a little time constraint. So I'm down to the 5 words. And so in my podcast, Jim, Me and my producers, we pick out 5 words. We want our author to say a sentence about the word just to get their reaction. So if I say the word broadcasting, you say
broad audience, signals being sent out over electronic waves, and it first began with the transformation of Morse code signals into radio news in the 19 teens, before 1919.
Yeah, it's great. You know, I hear broadcasting, I think personalities, and I think of people like you. I think
about an electronic process.
Yeah, it's interesting.
That's
why you're such a great broadcaster. You
know? That was what I taught in evolution of storytelling and American electronic news media here at the University of North Carolina. I taught for 5 semesters after I came here to Chapel Hill, and whenever you say broadcasting, my mind goes back to day one and what I was teaching to those students. Yeah.
I say the word sport. You say what?
From the beginning of mankind, going back to the days of ancient Egypt and eventually Greece and Rome, there have been organized contests of physical prowess, physical skill, and ultimately they came to be known as sports. I don't know how they became known as sports, but I know that they weren't called that at the beginning, because whatever they were called, it was in Roman or Greek or Phoenician or some other language that preceded the preeminence of English. But in English, it's sports.
How about the word boxing?
The purest sport, the most honest sport, as my great friend Tom Hauser has titled a recent book. The sport that tells us the most about who we are, what we can endure, what we can't endure, what we are like when confronted with danger and potential damage at the hands of another human being. All of that we learn from boxing, and it's my favorite sport.
Legacy.
So I don't think of that in terms of me, other than to say, my father died when I was 5 years old. My mother raised me. My grandmother taught me how to tell stories. I am their legacy. And I attempt through the things that I do to honor all 3 of them for everything they gave to me and taught to me when I was growing up.
Last word. I'm going to give you the last word, sir. Jim Lampley.
One of the luckiest people who has ever lived on this particular planet. A person who, because of the choices of others, not his own choice, was given all the opportunities he would most have dreamed of, up to and including calling boxing matches, up to and including going to 14 Olympics, up to and including that my then 8-year-old daughter was babysat for an entire day at the United States Boxing Writers Association dinner in New York by Muhammad Ali. That Muhammad Ali was my absolutely incomparable lifetime hero. He had been my hero when his name was Cassius Clay. That the very first live prize fight I ever attended was Cassius Clay versus Sonny Liston, February 25, 1964 in Miami Beach. My life reads like a fictional story. Then, I wouldn't blame anybody for buying my book and reading the book and thinking to themselves at some point, oh my gosh, did he make this up? Or is this really true?
It's really true. You know, when Stefan said to me that you wanted to come on my show, I was very flattered. So I consider myself lucky as well. But I lived it with you. So I was so excited to have you come on the show because I know that you have I know you feel blessed, and you should, and God bless you. And you've been a great contributor to our zeitgeist and our culture. But I lived it with you. You made it part of our life stories. And you need to know that. And you need to know that you have very grateful fans out there, Jim.
A few years ago,
and I'm one of them.
a few years ago, I would never have thought that I would say, Anthony Scaramucci, I love you.
Okay.
But I love you for saying that, and I love you for
I love you back.
your response to my book.
Yeah, I love you back. I really appreciate you joining us. Hall of Fame sportscaster, now author, Jim Lampley. Title of the book, It Happened, A Uniquely Lucky Life in Sports Television. And let me tell you, we are going to promote this. We have 200,000 followers on our YouTube channel, and I've got over 1 million in other sites. We're going to push this book very hard for you, sir, and I really appreciate you joining us today.
Thank you so much, Anthony. I appreciate it. And, I have really enjoyed this and we'll look forward to coming back.